Jeff, thank you so much for joining Scaling Laws.
Oh, it's great to be here, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. I'm sure this won't be the last time, but I want to go back to Jeff in early 2025. You're sitting on the couch, you're throwing a ball against the wall, you're, I don't know, playing Sudoku. I'm just kidding. Anyone who knows you knows that of course you were up to a million things, but what was the moment or what was the transition of saying, "Oh my gosh, there's this job at Anthropic. I get to be or at least apply to be the general counsel." What sparked you to consider yet another fascinating career move?
Well, I really wanted to get on the scaling laws, and I just thought, this may be
Oh,
my ticket finally to be
Jeff,
on your show.
the
There you
best the
go.
best answer I've ever heard in the history of scaling laws. A man after my own heart. Wow.
No, this had been an area that I'd been very, very interested in. I'd been following Anthropic for a while. So I have my center in Australia on democracy and disruptive technologies, and I had been studying and writing on the issue of how we make sure that this new era of technology and the economy that it will create works for everybody, and that it enhances democracy and humanity as opposed to overwhelming it. So it was very much on my mind, but I was kind of thinking I would do it from government or I'd do it from academia. I hadn't really been thinking about going back into the private sector. And I got a call out of the blue from the general counsel here, Brian Israel, who's just a terrific, terrific person. We got into a conversation about something else. He invited me back to extend the conversation more. And then afterward, he called me up out of the blue and said, "Would you ever consider working at Anthropic?" And I said, "Well, it's a great company, and I'm getting more and more interested in what you're doing. But what are you thinking?" He said, "I don't know. Why don't you just keep talking?" And that conversation eventually led to him offering me his job, and he was going to move into a strategic role, and it just worked out, in a way I couldn't have predicted, and so grateful it did.
So I'm thinking your next move has to be to write a very, very short career advice book because that is not the way they traditionally draw it up. But of course, a man with many background experiences and formative background experiences as yourself, this all comes as no surprise. But for the folks who aren't exactly sure of what the heck a general counsel is and what they do, can you provide just a brief overview, especially with respect to what it looks like to be a general counsel at an emerging technology company? Because you've spent time at Cruise, now you're at Anthropic. These are not like, you know, Bank of America jobs, not to diminish what I'm sure is a very demanding job, but what is the nature of a GC in a company that is moving quickly and moving in an innovative space?
Yeah, it's an interesting role to describe because if you think about it too hard, it overwhelms you. So your main job is to be responsible for the um, uh, compliance functions and legal functions of the company. But that extends into every part of a business because what you're trying to do is identify where the technology is going, what legal issues that could raise, how you get out ahead of those things, and being able to see around corners, and not only make sure that you're um, acting in compliance with the law, but in many cases there is no law. You're just, I mean, we're a frontier lab, so we're on the frontier. There generally aren't many rules on a frontier, but there are risks, and what you have to do is figure out how you're going to navigate those risks. So in many cases, you're a risk manager for the company, and you are someone who's trying to look out across the horizon and anticipate what rules need to be put into place and work with policy teams and communications teams and others to help solve some of those, as yet unsolved problems.
We're going to talk a little bit about your time at Cruise working on autonomous vehicles and some of the parallels between the AV and AI space.
Yeah.
But I want to just start on that question of regulatory ambiguity, or in some cases, a regulatory vacuum, and how you, as a lawyer, speaking in a generic sense, do navigate that space of saying, okay, there isn't a clear law here. Of course, there are morals, there are ethics, but then there's the real harm, in my opinion, of perpetuating the sort of lawyerly stereotype of, oh, well, if we go to Jeff or if we go to the GC, they'll just say no. They always say no, and lawyers are the worst, and blah, 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 blah. How do you balance that need to drive what is a transformative technology with the fact that you are sailing in uncharted waters in many regards?
Yeah, I think your responsibility is to first understand what it is that people are trying to accomplish. And if you can figure out what they're trying to accomplish, then you can start navigating where is the lawful path for this. So when people come to me and say, um, can I do this? And say, well, what do you want to do, and why do you want to do it? And then once they explain both the what and the why, it's much easier to say, okay, well, the path you were originally thinking, that wouldn't work because of the following limitations. On the other hand, you can get to the same place by following this path, which is a lawful path. And maybe there are a couple zigs and zags in it, or maybe it takes a little bit longer. But sometimes it's even more efficient, and they just weren't aware of the rules of the road. So that's it. To some extent, you're a guide and a navigator in helping people resolve those issues. And then in some cases, there really is no law. And what you do is you look for analogies and you look for principles, and you try and figure out a kind of the risk, which is, well, no one knows what the rule will be, but what are the odds that it's going to be the thing you want, and what are the odds that it won't be? And then you can bake that into your judgment about whether or not to take that risk.
So you are no stranger to those sorts of ambiguities, and you're no stranger to difficult technology, but AI seems particularly complex. And again, it's not as though you were just hanging around San Francisco, going on hikes in the Marin Headlands, but from a learning curve.
That sounds good, though, Kevin.
It does sound dreamy. Maybe the
Yeah.
next trip out, we'll find a way. I'll say it's a walking podcast, and you and I
Yes.
can go hike, and we'll justify it that way. But for the folks who are thinking, "Oh my gosh, AI in and of itself is hard to understand." There are whole courses, there are whole careers that are just grounded in learning the ins and outs of technology, this technology. And then when you push to the frontier, as you all are doing at Anthropic, how has your learning curve been? Are you just calling up random engineers and saying, "Hey, it's Jeff. I'd like a 101 tutorial on neural networks. I'll see you in 5 minutes." Or how are you going about this learning curve to stay up to date on what y'all are up to?
Yeah, well, I've been a tech lawyer, and I did bet the company cases for the last 30 years. And so I'm used to having to be the dumbest person in the room and ask those questions that the engineers think are obvious. But to me, as a lawyer, I need to understand in a different language. And and that's helpful for me, both in terms of, you know, asking questions that force the engineers to help unpack what they're doing, and then make it translatable for me to judges or juries or opposing counsel, or to other stakeholders, to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. So I actually find that's one of the fun parts of the job, is to learn this and then apply it to existing law. So I've had a number of roles over the years that have required me to do that. Either, whether I was working in government or working in diplomacy, or working in house or as outside counsel. It's basically the same skill set of just taking this sort of complex mass of um, uh, facts and try and put them into an orderly story that's understandable for first me, so I can tell it, but then for others, so they can make decisions about it.
And I think that's one of the most underappreciated aspects of a really smart person generally, but also a really smart lawyer, is that sort of humility. One of my many tired lines is, I really don't believe there's any such thing as an AI expert. In fact, if you've met an AI expert, it's the surest sign that they're not, because there's so many questions we don't have the answer to. And if you're the one walking into the room, especially full of a bunch of smart folks like the folks at Anthropic saying, "Oh no, I've got this. I understand the ins and outs." That to me is the best sign that perhaps you're not asking as many questions as you should be.
Yeah, no, I think. Uh, it's helpful to have teenagers. They keep you very humble. And but now my kids are are moving beyond the teen era. So being here has sort of kept me in that humble space.
Nice.
So I'm grateful.
Teenagers are good for a lot of things, and
Yeah.
I guess that's certainly one of them. So when we're thinking about the complexity of this regulatory environment in particular, as we discussed on the AV conversation, AVs were terra incognita to begin with for a
Yeah.
lot of the conversations of, hey, we've got this new vehicle. We don't know what it can do, in which conditions, in which areas. And there was also a heck of a lot of skepticism, right?
Yeah.
Moving from one city to the next, having folks who are very much wary of introducing some new technology into a new space. So, from your vantage point as being GC of Cruise and now being the chief legal officer at Cruise and now the GC at Anthropic, what parallels immediately jump out to you between these two spaces?
Well, again, they're on the frontier. What I find though with AI and a frontier lab in AI is that it's just bigger and broader. As challenging and interesting as AVs are, they're just one use case of AI, and now we're looking at developing AI for pretty much all human uses, and so that's the parallel is that they're both um, uncharted territory. It just turns out that this is a much bigger territory.
And from the sort of techno optimism and or techno skepticism perspective, we have this debate kind of reappearing in many ways where some folks argue, it seems like America has gotten maybe adrift from an original embrace of technology, while other folks are saying we're finally in a space where we can be a little bit more proactive and attentive to the drawbacks of technology. How do you see that mapping onto these two different spaces?
Yeah, so I tend to be a tech optimist. I think if you're going to go into this space, it's because you believe you can do good in it. And But I know people who are pessimists, and there was a great line by George F. Will. He was asked like why he was a pessimist. And he said, "Well, when you're a pessimist, you're either right or you're pleasantly surprised." So there are advantages to that, but I find that you look at a tool and you are optimistic because you're optimistic about people generally. A tool can do good or can do harm depending on who's holding it and how and for what intent. So, a hammer can build a house. It can also break someone's skull. It depends on who has it and why they have it. For me, I believe in that overall our species has been pretty good at figuring out how not to destroy itself and how to take new technologies, and when they go too far, to recognize that and to walk it back and to try and anticipate issues. And we're not perfect, but overall we tend to get it right if you've got people of goodwill with experience and skills and a value set to lean in on it. So I try to lean in on solving those kinds of big hairy problems where society can do some great things with the tool, and you want to mitigate or eliminate the bad things they can do.
When I think about your perspective on technology generally, it's a lot like a kaleidoscope, in my opinion, because you've spent time as an ambassador, you've been in these political circles, you've been in the throes of AI startups, of AV startups. It's just a very impressive set of views on what is a really difficult topic. And so, kind of removing the GC hat for a second and just more generally commenting on the current AI discourse. It seems like we are perhaps being a little bit more inflamed. There's kind of a recurring question about the direction of it writ large and whether that is going to be societally beneficial. What is your kind of meta commentary on the current state of AI discourse? Is it too short-sighted? Is it not long-termism enough? Where do you see this conversation going? And in particular, to the extent you're still in touch with all of your colleagues in Australia and Oceania. What is surprising to you about perhaps their framing versus the framing here in the States?
Yeah, that's a big set of questions. I think the way I think about it is that and is that this is one of those times where you're really grateful for representative democracy. Because if you over-index one way or the other on this technology, you can make a big mistake. If you under-index on it, then you are going to um, miss out on tremendous opportunities and possibly allow someone else to seize it, who doesn't share your values, who doesn't share your vision for a better world, and set standards that you're then going to have to live with. So you don't want to, you know, abandon the race. On the other hand, if you just think it's going to solve every problem and that the invisible hand of the market will allow this to result result perfectly in the beginning, it means you probably haven't spent a lot of time studying history. So you need to be prepared for, you need to do it, but you need to do it thoughtfully. And that's where representative democracy works, because you want to have representatives who are thoughtful, informed, and responsible about information, and then be able to, unpack the issues so that citizens can say, well, this is what we want, and this is what we don't want. And you're starting to see the beginnings of that. A challenge that we've had is that many people who wrote the laws didn't know about AI when they wrote the laws, and even people who are writing the laws now grew up in an era when AI didn't exist, and they are not sophisticated in it yet. And it's really an emerging set of staffers and younger, newer political leaders with tech backgrounds who are starting to change the debate and make it one where instead of people having really strongly held ideologies about this, they're starting to get facts, and they're starting to develop policies that are either workable or not, but can at least be debated.
Yeah, and I think that the search for information and trying to make these conversations more quantitatively grounded on
Yeah,
what are we doing? What are we building? What are the effects? And same goes for the regulatory proposals of
yeah,
what are we doing? What are we trying to achieve? And to
right.
what extent is it working or not? Is
Yeah,
just, yeah.
one of my favorite lines is people are entitled to their own opinions; they're not entitled to their own facts. And so, being able to get the facts on the table so that people understand what their choices are, that's what makes that's what makes society work.
Yeah, and that rings true with your earlier observation that we are, as a species and as individuals, we have agency over technology. And I think that's such an important reminder to folks who feel as though AI is just happening to them, to try
Yeah,
to empower them and provide them with the right information and channels for both democratic discourse and financial discourse and incentives to try to steer the technology in a productive direction. And that's something I don't know if we talk about enough.
yeah. I think the reason that people get fearful is when they feel as though they don't have a voice in it, and they don't have enough information to know what they should fear and what they shouldn't. And yeah, information has always been, a great disinfectant. of, it's of sort of bad ideas and dangerous concepts and corrosive actions. What you want is to give people accurate information. I think the biggest challenge for people today is that um, information comes in such a massive volume that it's hard for them to really manage it. I heard a Fields medalist give this great analogy. He was talking about how food used to be very scarce, and how you would hoard it and be very thoughtful about how you stewarded it. And then over time, as we became a more affluent society, food was everywhere. And people actually had to learn how to diet, and they had to be careful about what they ate, and they had to learn to exercise, which was, not something that you did separately. But we had to manage, what to do with all these cheap calories and easily accessible calories. We have the same thing now with information. We just have so much information that we have to come up with better management systems. And one of the things I'm excited about with AI is our capacity to accomplish that, to actually make information more digestible, more understandable, allow the facts to be separated from the fears, and help people make good choices.
Yeah, it is wild to me when folks haven't experimented, for example, with just translating a document to Spanish in 3 seconds, right? And to see, for example, when I go and talk to judges and I ask them, hey, what percentage of your state's population only speaks Spanish or only speaks Russian or so on and so forth? And they'll tell me, oh, I think it's between 5 and 10%. And then you ask, okay, do you ever publish an opinion in those languages? Right? And for many state courts, the answer is no. So when you just
Right?
think about what I like to refer to as boring AI, being able to
Mhm.
solve so many of these informational gaps, it is just profound. And so
Yeah.
I asked you to throw off your GC hat. Now I'm going to ask you to put on your head of the Jeff Bleich Center. So could you introduce your center and its work and mission and how AI has altered that in any way, shape, or form?
So the center was established at Flinders University in Australia, um, based on a speech that I had given, and the speech talked about democracy and disruptive technologies. And so that's the focus of our work, is to understand new and emerging uh, disruptive technologies and how they may affect our ability to self-govern, and then to come up with strategies working not only in one country but across countries that have shared values, particularly traditional Western democracies, to accomplish that. So that's the mission of it, and I can tell you about the speech, but that's up to you.
Yeah, well, yeah, please do share a little more about the speech for folks who haven't been as familiar with the center.
Yeah, so I was finishing up my term as ambassador. And earlier in my term, there had been this optimism about how technology was going to perfect democracy. Democracy had been on the rise around the world, and there was a sense, during the time of the um, Arab Spring, that the tools of search engines, of social media networks, and of iPhones were going to make it possible for, you know, democracy to exist everywhere. Because the main impediment to democracy was the control of information by authoritarians. And if you can get accurate information with your search engine, and you can share it seamlessly with your friends through social media, and you can, have all that power sitting in your pocket, and it's in everyone's pocket, then it would be able to democratize the world. And we were seeing the beginnings of that with the Arab Spring and Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt, and these established totalitarian governments just crumbling, based upon not a massive military coup, but just people using their phones. So, but what I started to see in the intelligence over the year or two after that was that the authoritarians had seen that too, and they recognized that, look, if a rabble can take these tools and take down a 30-year-old regime, imagine with all the sophistication and levers at our disposal what we can do with these tools. And they started using it against democracy. And so my speech was about that, and the need for democracies to focus on how we make sure that uh, these new disruptive technologies serve humanity as opposed to overwhelming it. And I think everyone who attended it thought, well, that was a pretty depressing speech from the American ambassador. Aren't you supposed to be sort of the fun-loving diplomat? You
Yeah,
just make,
where's the
yeah,
optimism?
yeah, yeah. We don't expect diplomats to ever get heavy. So they asked me if I'd be interested in helping come up with solutions, and I said I'd love to. And one thing led to another, and someone donated to the school to establish the center, and they wanted to name it for him. And he was like, I don't know anything about this subject, but Bleich scared the hell out of me, so
There
why
you
don't you
go.
name it for him? So that's why it was named for me.
I may have to change my remarks and be a little bit more dour going forward, and maybe I can get an elementary school to name a wing after some crazy idea I have. Nothing as astute as your own, but I wonder.
Yeah, I don't see you ever being able to pull off Dower, Kevin. I'm
Oh
sorry.
gosh, yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So I wonder, looking at that transition from social media so we'll say social media 1.0, social
Yeah.
networking era, to social media, to AI, and now looking at kind of the next frontier of AI when we're talking about agentic AI, when we're talking about AI becoming truly integrated into more and more institutions. To what extent do you see the battles of the past eras of skepticism of big tech as we knew it in 2016 and some of those earlier battles casting a shadow on some of the conversations we're having now? And do you think that's a uniquely US phenomena, or is this sort of hesitancy maybe something that you've seen even in Australia and in other places among your many travels?
Yeah. No, I think it's normal. I think it's a normal uh, attitude of human beings. We're curious about new tools, but we're also a bit fearful of them. And even though we can see some positive use cases, we tend to index on the negative use cases. So if you look at electricity, uh, I don't think there's anyone today who would say, I think the world would be a much better place without electricity. It has improved the capacity of human beings to do things they never imagined humans doing, that we never would have been able to do without electricity. And it's one of those generative technologies that makes many other things possible. I think the internet falls into that same category. And although, I'm old, I wasn't so old that I was around when electricity was found, but I was around for the internet. And there was a lot of, you know, this is sort of a nerdy thing. You have to write www dot something else before you write, and then what's this .com? And I mean, people were, if you watch old newscasts about the beginnings of the internet, people sort of thought of it as a novelty. They didn't realize and recognize it as a generative technology. And then once it became more generative, um, then they started worrying about it in terms of, well, what's it doing in terms of privacy? Is this Big Brother? And those issues arose, and it's good that they did, because it forced us to start having the kind of conversation I was saying earlier, a sophisticated conversation based on facts, where we could look at how things can go right, how things can go wrong, and allow human beings to help make choices on what kind of society they want to live in.
And thinking about the future of kind of the legal profession, oh, sorry. Thinking about the future of the legal profession and the trajectory of kind of public policy and emerging public policy. If you were speaking to one of my students, and I'd love to have you in Austin, Jeff, we got to come get some breakfast tacos down here. If you were
Good.
speaking to one of my students, let's say a 1L at a law school, who says, Jeff, I'm excited about AI. I share your passion about emerging technology and the promise it can deliver. What's your advice? Is it stick to the status quo, get the best grades, go to the biggest firm, and set yourself up for some trajectory down the road? Or do you think now is the time for a sort of big pivot for a lot of folks who want to get more involved in this space?
No. My advice to a law student is engage AI in your work now, like right away. My son just graduated from law school this year, and that was my only advice to him, is that uh, AI is going to allow you to be a much better lawyer, and those who adopt it sooner will do better and better. My own experience was when I was in his position, just graduating from college. LexisNexis had just started, and they gave free subscriptions to students at in law schools. But a lot of people who are working in law firms had never even heard of it, let alone used it. So I'd been using LexisNexis for a couple of years, and I was able to keep a free subscription for my first year. And during my during the summer, I would get these assignments to like shepherdize something, and people were using like dictaphones and stenographers' pools. I mean, this was this was a long time ago. They didn't. Many lawyers didn't even have PCs on their desk, and so they would give me an assignment that they thought would take a week, and I'd come in a half hour later and say, "Well, I've shepherdized all the cases, and here's what they say," and they thought I was a wizard. They thought like I had magical powers, and it really supercharged my career. And I think it will supercharge the careers of lawyers. Lawyers will still be needed. You're going to need the storytelling, you need the judgment, you're going to need the experience, you're going to need the capacity to relate to other human beings. I would not run away from the law. I would embrace the AI and bring it into the law.
And when we're trying to get a sense of how best to handle this very tricky technology, again, looking to some of the analogies of other waves of emerging tech, is there one that stands out to you? Are you the person who says the best analogy is the internet? Do we need to go back to the telegraph? Is it electricity? What is the best analogy for you and why?
I think it's a mistake to get too hung up on analogies. I really do.
There, you're
Um,
fighting the
be-
hypo, Jeff. That's the you forgot in your law school training.
Yeah, no, um the reason that I don't go with the hypo is because as you said at the beginning, AI really is unique. We've had electrification, but electrification was rolled out in a linear way. You know, you had to set up the cables and the wires and everything else. The same thing happened with the internet, in the sense that you had to build out internet speeds, you had to figure out compression, you had to get people using keyboards and get computers on desks. It was 20 years before you really felt the full impact of the internet revolution. AI, look at how we're scaling. It's everywhere all at once all the time, and the pipelines are built. All that's happening now is the combination of the data and the compute is moving us closer and closer to AGI, which will be a major transition point that will exist everywhere, all at once, all the time. So I'd like to give you a good analogy, but we haven't been here before.
And I would love to talk to you about so many points you just raised right there, but I know that we're starting to run low on time, and so I wonder from your unique vantage point, if you could correct one thing, one misunderstanding you see most about AI, what would it be? What do you wish if you could wake up tomorrow and everyone gets the same headline or some same subject line email from Jeff at Anthropic? What's it say? Or what's the authoritative PDF or statement, or what do you send them?
Yeah. Uh, AI will make your life better if you let it. Um, I think that as long as you go in with that attitude, that you're going to be responsible for making it work for you, it'll work for you. Uh, I think, for example, I've become better at a lot of things outside of AI just by using AI. So what I do is I have to prompt, and it means that I have to ask better and better questions. And I have to be thoughtful about what is it that I left out of the question that made me get the response I got initially. And how can I listen more acutely as well for what is the missing point here in a regular conversation, and how can I be a better friend by asking the right follow-up question. I think AI will make us better human beings over time, if we let it.
Wow. Well, that is a pretty dang great place to end. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was wonderful seeing you.
It was great seeing you too, Kevin. I welcome, would love welcome an invitation anytime.
All right. Challenge accepted, sir.